Hey guys, how's it going? It's 8-Bit Eric, and if there's one thing that a lot of people are genuinely concerned about, it's censorship in video games and just censoring video games in general. Now, recently we had an article that we covered talking about somebody in Illinois proposing a bill that video games that are excessively violent get banned in Illinois, which GTA was one of the ones that was singled out as a game that is overly violent that would be considered being banned in the state of Illinois. And every once in a while we get all these issues where things like violence and certain suggestive themes that are, I guess, not exactly considered appropriate for children, they get blamed for things, and they get blamed as the cause for situations like violence and guns and things like that. There's actually no proof, you know, not to get into anything, but honestly, there's no proof that video games is 100% a cause to blame over other things. I think it's more on the mental health towards an individual, not necessarily just the video games. But we're going to get into something very interesting on Sony. Sony has been guilty of actually censoring games when they come over to the United States. And this is very interesting because it's quite often looked at as Sony being the adult system that has the adult games that are violent and you know, like games like Last of Us and games like Days Gone and God of War and stuff like that. A little bit more mature content. While we're going to read this article, this came out about a week ago or so. I'm just now barely getting to this, and we'll give our thoughts about it and have a discussion in the comments down below. So it says Sony reportedly censoring violent depictions in games. So Sony isn't allowing video games to depict dismemberment of human characters. And this is interesting because we got games like Resident Evil that in the past have had dismemberment of humans. Like Resident Evil 7, for example, you literally get your hand cut off in that game. So very interesting reportedly. So this is still just like early reports and stuff like that. There's nothing 100% confirmed. This is probably beyond just a little bit more of a rumor at this point. But this says Sony is censoring violent depictions in video games, according to a recent report. The degree of violence in video games has been a controversial aspect for quite a while now. It is often debated that games should have lower degrees of violence to make them accessible to a larger audience. Despite that, a number of developers have depicted some mature and dark tones in games. And we've seen it. Again, Resident Evil 7 was a good example of a lot of dark tones and violence in a game. So according to a report on GameSpark Japan via recent era user I Like Feet, weird name, Sony is asking developers to remove violent depictions in video games. This comes from the Japanese development studio CyberConnect 2's president and CEO Hiroshi Matsuyama, who states that Sony compelled the developers to make the changes in the Naruto Ultimate series. One of the characters in the game, Minato Namikaze, was missing an arm in the original story. However, in the final game, his arm was present to comply with Sony's policies. So you can see that's an example of Sony imploring a company to, I guess, be less violent, to change things up. Interesting. Again, in the past, I've actually covered stuff with video game violence and stuff like that. I have that infamous video games made me gay video that kind of proved my argument that, you know, stuff like violence and stuff like being gay doesn't affect anything in video games with gamers. But yeah, it's kind of a hard brick road to prove video game violence, in my opinion. Anyways, he further mentions that the reason for that was that loss of limbs and characters that have a human appearance was not allowed by Sony Interactive Entertainment and not prohibited by CERO as such. CERO is the organization responsible for video game ratings in Japan. In the story, Minato is not technically a human, considering that he was resurrected. However, considering that the character had a human appearance, it wasn't allowed. So there's like all sorts of weird loopholes and situations when it comes to this stuff. To me, I don't think it's such a big deal. It's based on source material that, you know, is part of a cartoon. And I don't think the actual cartoon or the anime is facing as much backlash as it does for the video game, which is interesting enough. Now, quite notable of all the fact is that SIE has allowed such depictions in certain games. Matsuyama mentions that Dragon Ball Z Kakarot has a sequence in which Nappa's arm was dismembered. Surprisingly, this wasn't omitted from the game because there's a difference in impressions between the two games. What's this difference isn't mentioned, but it's likely the fact that the Naruto series has a more realistic tone. Whether this policy is specific to Japanese video games isn't clear. So Naruto's games get censored, but Dragon Ball's don't? I don't know about that. That's very interesting. So Sony's stance on this matter is quite surprising, considering the fact that some of its games have set a benchmark for mature tones in video games. For instance, The Last of Us 2 had such several brutal and gory moments despite receiving some criticism, was widely acclaimed as well. So yeah, exactly. You know, the whole, you know, no spoilers, but you know, the main death of one of the characters was hardcore. It had golf clubs. So with Sony itself taking such a bold direction in video games itself, it'll be interesting to see what Sony's justification for such a stance is. So how widespread this is going to be? Is this just going to be something in Japan? Something that Japanese developers have to deal with? It remains to be seen. But again, every so often it seems like about this time of the year, violence in video games is often questioned. Where you start to see politicians, you start to see organizations, you start to see certain, I guess, groups start to approach video games and start to throw the whole censorship thing around. I get it. There's certain things that should not be allowed in a game, like a child being killed. I would say that. I would definitely be for that. But, you know, gun violence, I mean, where does it stop? In a game like Resident Evil or Last of Us or Call of Duty or GTA? Like, where do you pick and choose? Like, that's what I thought was interesting about the Illinois article. GTA was banned, but Call of Duty wasn't. But both feature violence in some sort of fashion. GTA is a little bit more fictionalized. Yeah, it does take place like in an everyday city setting, but it's a lot more. I would say GTA is a little bit, doesn't take itself as seriously as like a Call of Duty would. You know, a Call of Duty I feel is a bit more realistic. So where does the censorship start and where does it begin? And I don't know. It's a very big gray area, but I feel that sometimes it gets blown out of proportion when it comes to blaming video games on violence. But that's just me. I don't know. What do you guys think about Sony possibly censoring violent depictions in games? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'll see you guys soon.